Fujifilm cameras are great for travel photography because of their small size, their unassuming looks, and it's just fun to use the cameras. But because travel photography is such a broad, multidisciplinary genre, and you might be doing landscapes 1 minute and then street photography and candid environmental portraits the next, both you and your camera have to be ready for all of it. So in this video, I'm going to take you through my recommended travel photography settings for Fujifilm cameras. And these are just my recommendations based on how I use the cameras and some things that I've learned in my years traveling the world using Fujifilm cameras for travel. I'm also going to be going over some settings that are found in all Fujifilm X cameras. Now, this means that your camera may not have some of these settings, so you can just ignore those. And the settings that you do have, if you want to do something different, that's fine. But I think this will give you a good place to start when you are getting your camera set up for travel so that you can capture all of those memorable moments for your next trip. We are going to start in the image quality setting menu. We're not going to go over every setting here. We're going to go over the ones that I think are important in order. And again, your camera may not have all of these, so you can just skip through those. But starting with image size, this only matters if you're recording the JPEG file. Your RAW file output is going to be a large 3:2 no matter what, but you can crop and downsize your JPEG file. Even on the smallest Fujifilm X sensors, a medium size is still going to be plenty big for printing up to 11 by 14 or even 24 by 30 inch prints. It's even going to be too big for blogs or social media, which are going to downsize that medium sized file. So if you are recording JPEGs with the intent of sharing to friends and family or posting to social media, you could even get away with a small size here. And I do recommend that at least when you're traveling, you record every single pixel on the sensor. All of those other aspect ratios are really fun for photo challenges and things like that. But when you're on some kind of trip, I just recommend recording all of the pixels and then cropping later if you need to. In image quality, I do recommend recording the fine plus raw formats. And that's because Fujifilm is known for giving you beautiful JPEGs straight out of the camera. And so I like to share those immediately when I'm traveling. I can transfer them from my camera over to my smartphone and share those processed JPEG files, but I still have the RAW file as like the archive that I can further edit and refine when I get home if I want to. If you only want to record the JPEG file, you don't have to record RAW. Don't let anyone tell you you must record RAW. I'd recommend recording the highest quality JPEG file possible, which is going to be the fine quality. If you are recording the RAW file, I would recommend recording the lossless compressed format. That'll make that RAW file much smaller than the uncompressed, but it is a lossless format, meaning that none of that data is going to be thrown away in the RAW file. Just note that some programs like Mac Finder and Photos may not be able to extract the thumbnail with the lossless compressed format, but I think that's the least of your worries when you're trying to save space and record a true RAW file format. For select JPEG or HEIF, yes, it's true that the HEIF file format is a better format, but not all devices or software can display an HEIF yet. So set this to JPEG so that you can have universal compatibility everywhere you might be sharing that photo. And that also leads us into color space. Adobe RGB is a larger color space, but all of your phones and computer screens and other places you're going to be sharing those files will be using the sRGB color space. So you want them to be using the same color space. So set sRGB here, and just note that this does not apply to your RAW files. It will only be for your processed JPEGs. There are so many other image styling settings in this menu that you can use to adjust the look of your photos. And we're not going to be going through all of that here because I have so many other resources, other videos and ebooks and things, and you can check out all of those links in the video description. So let's move on to the AF/MF setting menu. Part of being ready for all of the things that travel photography can throw at you is having your camera set up for simple, efficient use, which is why I recommend setting the AF mode to all. When it's set to all, you can either tilt or push the joystick, and we'll see how to set that up a few minutes from now. But you can enter that edit screen using the joystick and then use the command dials to cycle through all of the available autofocus modes. You don't need to come into the menu to select between single point or zone or whatever else. You can do that all on the camera screen. So set that to all, and then some of the newer cameras have an AF mode all setting. This allows you to limit the options that are available to you when you rotate that command dial, so you can disable the ones that you don't use in either single autofocus or continuous autofocus. And that lets you select the autofocus modes that you do use much faster by not having to scroll through the ones that you never use. For example, I really simplify what's available to me in single shot autofocus, AFS. So I have two single point sizes selected and one of the zone sizes. And in continuous autofocus, I just have one zone size and wide tracking. Single point, I don't think is very useful in continuous autofocus. So I don't have to scroll through all of those when I am in continuous autofocus. Speaking of continuous autofocus, going into AFC custom setting, this sets the behavior of the continuous autofocus system when it's tracking things that are moving, and setting it to one multi-purpose is the best generic setup for travel photography. You can turn on Store AF mode by orientation, and this will really help you speed up your shooting when you're switching between horizontal and vertical compositions. You can have different AF modes and different positions on the screen stored for each one of those camera orientations. So you could have a small single point in the lower third of the screen for landscapes. And then if you're going to do a portrait and switch the camera to the vertical orientation, it could go to a zone size on the upper third of the screen. And that, like I said, will help you shoot faster and more efficiently. The number of focus points is going to give you different options depending on the generation of camera that you have, but I'd recommend choosing the smaller number. And here's why. Yes, it's nice to have all of the different focus points that are available on the camera sensor, especially with mirrorless cameras, but unless you are doing macro photography or you're locked down on a tripod and need absolute precise focus, you don't need all of those focus points. And that's not what we're doing in travel photography. I'd much rather be able to quickly select a focus point than have all of the focus points available. And so that's why I choose the smaller number, 117 in all of the newer cameras, and that just speeds things up. Make sure that pre-AF is off. This is a colossal waste of battery, and when you're traveling, you need to extend that battery life as much as possible. If this is on, the camera is always going to be focusing whenever the camera is on, not just when you're commanding autofocus. So that's really going to kill that battery. So make sure that is off. I'd also recommend turning the AF illuminator off. That's the little lamp on the front of the camera that comes on in low light to help the autofocus system. It does have a limited effective range, and when you're traveling, if you're doing any kind of candid photography or you're shooting indoors in museums, it can be incredibly annoying. It can surprise people, and it can blind someone if you're doing environmental or candid portraits by having that light come on and shine in their eyes. So I'd recommend just keeping that off. The latest Fujifilm cameras can handle autofocus and low light really well, and you also have manual focus available to you if the light is that low. You can choose one of your manual focus assists if you do need to focus manually, and you can watch another video that I did about all of those different manual focus assists. The newer cameras do have a feature for the manual focus assist that I really love, and that's the Interlock MF Assist and Focus Ring. If you are using manual focus with one of those assist modes, like focus peaking, That focus peaking outline can obscure your composition when you're not actively focusing, when you don't need it. And so when this feature is on, that focus peaking or whatever MF assist mode that you're using, it's going to be hidden so that you can cleanly compose your photo. And then once you touch that manual focus ring to start focusing, then it'll come on to help you focus, and a couple seconds later will go away so you have that clean composition again. I wouldn't recommend turning on focus check. Just keep this off. If that's on, then your camera is going to automatically magnify your focus area when you touch the manual focus ring, which you may not want all the time. You can do it manually using a variety of other methods like pushing in on the rear command dial or double tapping the screen or pushing the joystick in. It just depends on the camera that you have. But there are other ways of magnifying your focus area if you need to. So just keep this off. If you end up doing any kind of street photography and you are using manual focus, you can use the zone focus technique, which again you can learn about in another video. But if you do want to use this focus technique, I would recommend setting the depth of field scale to the film format basis. And that's going to give you a usable depth of field scale to guess your subject's distance for when you don't want to bring the camera up to your face and start autofocus, or autofocus just isn't working. I'd also recommend setting the release focus priority options, both of them to release, because sometimes you'll need to be able to press the shutter all the way for a picture, even when the camera does not have a confirmed focus lock. You might know that it's in focus, the camera doesn't, or you just need to capture that moment, even if there is no autofocus lock. And so set this to release so that shutter release is not inhibited by having an autofocus lock. Let's now go into the shooting setting menu. Many of the settings in here are going to be situation dependent. So we'll go down to the IS mode option for image stabilization. Set this to shooting only. If it's on all the time, that's really going to deplete your battery. If you set it to shooting only, then that image stabilization is only going to be active when you take that picture, and that can help extend your battery life. Now let's talk about Auto ISO. I love Auto ISO. I recommend everyone use Auto ISO. It's one less thing to think about by giving the camera permission to operate within a specified ISO range. I'm not going to go through the entire setup here. You can learn more about that in yet another video that I did about Auto ISO. But as far as in terms of the context of travel photography, I'd recommend having at least one Auto ISO program with a minimum shutter speed of 1/200th of a second. That's if you're photographing anything that's moving, street photography or other normal day-to-day life. That's usually going to be fast enough to freeze most movement and without requiring an excessively high ISO. So that'll really help you get much sharper photos. And then if you're photographing still life, you can set up another Auto ISO program with a minimum shutter speed of auto. And that's going to base that minimum shutter speed on your lens focal length, which is perfect for still life. It'll keep your ISO lower. That's it for the shooting setting menu. I go over all of these other options in my Fujifilm camera tutorial courses. So if you're not sure what all of those other settings do, you can check out those courses. But we're going to move on to the user setting menu. You want to make sure that you format your memory card before each trip. And that will make sure that memory card is clean, the file structure is set up and ready to go. Just make sure that you have downloaded any photos that are on that card because it'll wipe it clean. But that's always just good practice to format your cards before every trip. Hopefully, you already have your date and time set. This is your home date and time. But the next option, time difference, lets you set a local time zone for wherever you're traveling. So you just go in here, you go to local, where you are currently now on your travels, and you can set that new time zone and keep this option on local as you travel. And then once you get home, you can just set it back to home to get back to your current home time zone. If you're changing lenses a lot as you're traveling, there are higher chances of some foreign object like dust or fibers entering the camera body and attaching themselves to your sensor. So you can have sensor cleaning happen automatically whenever you cycle the power. I prefer to have sensor cleaning occur when I turn the camera on. So that sensor has the best chance of being clean right before I start taking pictures. It does slow down the startup time ever so slightly, but I'd much rather have a clean sensor as soon as I start taking pictures. If something is still stuck to your sensor and this is not getting it off, you're going to have to clean that sensor manually. And I offer a few different ways that you can do that in another video that I'll link here. In sound setting, I'd recommend turning off all sounds because those are going to draw attention to you. And in my opinion, they can be pretty annoying. I'm sure we've all been in a museum or a church or somewhere when we're traveling and we enjoy the silence, and then someone's camera's autofocus beeps are going off all the time. So just turn these off. You can still capture great images without that kind of audio feedback. Let's go into the screen setting menu, and keeping up with our discussion of preserving battery power when we're traveling, set the EVF brightness to auto. The camera is going to do a good job of adjusting your viewfinder brightness automatically, dimming it when it can to save your battery. And then the LCD brightness, set that to 0 as a default. And then if you're in any kind of dark environment, you can turn that down even further to help save the battery. Turning off image display is another good way to save your battery when you're traveling. But more importantly, this image display, which will automatically play back your last image for you right after you capture that image, it's a distraction. If it comes on after every photo, you're going to be tempted to review all of those photos, and you might miss what is happening right in front of you. So turn that off so you're not tempted by those distractions, and then review your images when it makes sense to using the playback button. The older Fujifilm cameras have a setting called Preview Pic Effect. If you have that, you're going to want to turn that on. Newer cameras, this is called Natural Live View, and if you have Natural Live View, you're going to want to turn that off. And what that's going to do is let you preview what all of your image quality settings are going to do to your final photo, so you can see what that final photo is going to look like. If you have Preview Pic Effect off or Natural Live View on, you're going to get more of a RAW only kind of view. And if you're only recording the RAW file format, you might want to do that just so you can have a clean, unprocessed image in your live view. There are some other composition tools that you can enable. One is the framing guideline. I'd recommend doing the grid 9 here, which is your rule of thirds grid. And then some of the newer cameras, you have options for an electronic level, choosing either a 2-dimensional or a 3-dimensional electronic level. I think 2D is just fine for when you're traveling. There's less stuff on the screen. And you're going to enable both of these, the framing guideline and the electronic level, in one of the next menu settings, Display Custom Setting. This is where you can configure the information that is displayed on your screen. So I like to enable the framing guideline, the electronic level, and the histogram. And those are all going to help me compose and expose my photos. Let's now go into the button dial setting menu and talk about the focus lever setting. I mentioned this earlier when I said to set your AF mode to all. You can program different things depending on whether you push the joystick, so you press it in, or you tilt it, you push it in any direction. For push, different cameras have different options, but you can set this to either center or zoom. I recommend setting center here. It's just a really quick, easy way to get that focus point back into the center of the screen. But if your camera does not have a rear command dial that you can push in, you might want to look at setting this to zoom so that you can push the joystick in to zoom in on your focus area to check the focus. if you will be using manual focus a lot. But center is a good one here for travel. And then for the tilt function, set that to edit focus area. When this is set to edit focus area, that's when you can take advantage of the AF mode all setting. So you tilt the focus area, you get to that edit screen, you can move it around with the joystick, and then you can change all of the sizes with the command dial. Let's now go down to the shutter AF option. I prefer to disable these to turn it off. And what that means when this is off is that the shutter button cannot be used to focus. You'll have to use the back button focus technique, which means pushing the AFL or AF on button on the back of the camera to command autofocus. And why I think that really helps in travel photography is because you don't want to have to start autofocus every time you take a picture. You can just focus on your subject once and then keep pressing the shutter button to take a burst of photos. Or if you're just waiting for the right moment to happen, you can press the shutter when that happens without having to focus again. You can learn more about using back button focus and setting this up in yet another video that I will link here that you can watch later. And then for shutter auto exposure, I think it's best to have the exposure locked when the shutter is pressed halfway in single shot autofocus mode. That means that you can recompose your photo with the shutter pressed halfway, and that exposure is not going to change. However, if you are tracking moving subjects through varying light, you're probably going to be in continuous autofocus mode, AFC, and if that lighting is changing, you're going to want the exposure to catch up with that. So that's why I turn this off for AFC. Fujifilm cameras give us the option to press the shutter button without a memory card installed in the camera. I think that could be catastrophic if you're not paying attention to the other symbology on the screen, so I recommend setting Shoot Without Card off. If you're using auto white balance, which I recommend, you can lock the auto white balance so that it doesn't change as you recompose your photo. That's another function that you're going to have to program to a custom control. But the AWB lock mode is where you can set the behavior of that switch if you program it. I like to set it as an on-off switch so I can push a custom button to lock the white balance to its current value, take however many pictures I need to take in that lighting, and then when I want to unlock the white balance and go to a different scene, then I can push it again to unlock it. Going into the power management menu, auto power off, I'd recommend setting at least less than 5 minutes here. I think 2 minutes is a good time period here to set, which means the camera is going to enter standby mode. If you are inactive for 2 minutes, you can always wake it back up by pressing the shutter button halfway. Just don't turn this off because that is a good way to waste your battery. And then for performance, just keep it on standard or normal. The high or the boost settings, they're great for sports and action photographers, but for travel photography, standard or normal is perfectly fine, and it'll help make your battery last longer. The economy option may make your autofocus performance suffer too much. Now going into the Save Data Settings submenu, for frame number, I like to set this to continuous because if you do end up swapping out memory cards during your trip, it just makes organization a lot easier if the numbering for each photo is not reset for every memory card that you use. If it's set to continuous, the numbering sequence is going to continue on the new memory card. And I just find that helps out with organization. If your camera has 2 memory card slots, you'll see a card slot setting option. When I'm traveling, I prefer to have this set to the backup option, which means that both memory cards are going to be a mirror image of one another. Every picture that you take is going to be saved to both. And this is a good way to back up your photos while you're traveling. In case anything happens to one of those memory cards, you at least have a copy of everything on the other. Don't forget to set your name and copyright info under author and copyright. That's a good thing to do to have your name attached to all of your photos. And then geotagging, turn this on if you want to have a record of where all of your photos were taken. You will need to have your camera connected to your smartphone via the Fujifilm X app, and you're going to have the location syncing enabled in the network setting menu, which we'll look at in a minute. But when geotagging is on here, that's what is going to save that location data to every photo. And when you get home, you can see where all of your photos were taken on a map in things like Lightroom or Photo Mechanic. Now going into the connection setting or the network USB setting menu, if you do want to use the app, you should keep Bluetooth on. Bluetooth uses very little power, and you're not going to use it all the time, but it's okay to leave it on here. You'll also want to pair your camera to your phone following the on-screen instructions so that you can do things like having your time and date automatically synced to your camera, transfer images from your camera to your smartphone, and have that geotagging, your location info from your smartphone, saved to your camera. There's another setting in here called Auto Image Transfer, and I would recommend having this off because if this is on, every single picture that you take is going to be automatically transferred to your phone, which is really going to waste your battery and quickly fill up your phone. So keep it off and then manually transfer the photos that you want to. The final setting in here that you should look at is resize image for smartphone. Turn that on so that when you do transfer your photos over from your camera to your smartphone, you're not transferring the full size files. This is going to downsize them to 3 megapixels for transferring to your smartphone, which is still big enough for social media. Even Instagram is going to downsize that photo. It's not going to affect the original file, but it will speed up the transfers, save your battery, and save storage on your smartphone. So that takes us through all of the menus and my recommended travel photography settings for those menus. The last thing that I do want to mention is customizing your camera. We went through a lot of settings here and all of the different various menus, shooting menu, AF, MF menu, and whatnot. And if there are settings that you change quite a bit, you're going to have to hunt through all of those different menus to find that setting, unless you set up your own custom menu. Setting up My Menu is really going to help make you more efficient as you're traveling, find those settings much faster, and save you a lot of frustration. So you can watch another video about how to set up My Menu. Look for that link in the video description, as well as links on how to customize all of your different controls, so your custom buttons, setting them to functions that will, again, help you work more efficiently, and then also customizing the quick menu or the Q menu. You'll find links to all of those different ways to customize your camera in the video description. So I hope you found this video useful in getting your Fujifilm camera set up for your next trip so that you can bring back some great, memorable pictures. If you do want to learn more about how all of these settings work, the exposure system, focus, and all of the customization options, you can find all of that in my Fujifilm Photography Fundamentals course, which you'll find linked here on the screen. And you can take 20% off of that course with the code TUBE20. If you have any other questions or maybe some settings that I didn't mention or some other things that you think are important, worth mentioning, please let us know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. Subscribe for more great tips like this every week, and I'll see you in the next video.